Welcome back to Nonstop Recap. Today we'll be going over the 2020 horror film, What Lies Below. We start off with young Libby reading on a bench when a young boy creeps up and snaps a picture of her. She gets picked up by her mother, Michelle, who asks about her summer at archaeological camp. She mostly just asks about boys, which she even sings a song about before telling Libby she needs to dress more attractively. Michelle lets Libby drive, and Libby gets distracted by a real estate sign. Michelle tells Libby not to think about it because she needs to save for Libby's college fund. Libby tries to snap back about the expensive watch Michelle's wearing, but it turns out to be a gift from Michelle's new boyfriend. They arrive at their lakeside cabin where Michelle's inhumanly hunky boyfriend John emerges from the water and mystifies Libby with his Speedo. He introduces himself to Libby and gives her a gift which he says is a Navajo fertility bracelet. He comes across as a bit of a nerd, so naturally, Libby's sold. She hastily unpacks an outfit that showcases her body, and the three sit down for dinner. Libby learns that John's an aquatic geneticist who's been living by the lake in hopes of teaching freshwater fish how to evolve to live in saltwater. He doesn't really explain how he intends to do this, but he does a pretty cool party trick involving a couple of straws and some ice cubes. He then chokes on some salad and prompts a sympathetic hug from Michelle, during which he suggestively rubs Libby's shoulder. In bed that night, she begins to pleasure herself, but stops when she realizes she's out of soda. She goes downstairs to get more, and on the way back hears Michelle and John in bed. She tries to watch them from under the door, but runs away when she sees a shadow approaching. She lies in bed pretending to sleep. John stops at the door and watches her for an uncomfortable period of time. The next morning, Michelle invites Libby on a hike, but Libby suggests they have other plans. They go outside and dig up two old tins labeled with their names, along with a third tin labeled Grandpa. They apparently have an annual tradition of leaving notes for themselves, and they argue when Michelle doesn't have anything for Grandpa's tin. We learned that Michelle's father left the house to Libby when he died, and that Michelle has always resented him for not trying to get custody after his divorce. Michelle leaves, and Libby goes on a walk alone. She gets stung by a centipede, which she starts to kill when John emerges from the water and stops her. He says that it's rare and was just protecting its young. He also warns her that it's venomous, and he treats the wound by lightly blowing on it. John asks about Libby's argument with Michelle and if he had anything to do with it. He offers to leave the house, but Libby tells him to stay. When Libby gets home, she finds Michelle in bed. She checks Michelle's drawers for alcohol, but Michelle says she just had an upset stomach. They make up, and Michelle reveals that she and John are getting married. She also reveals that John thinks he's 35 instead of 42. Libby tries to research the centipede that stung her when she sees John returning from a jog. He removes his shirt and drinks the sweat from it before looking up and seeing Libby. She ducks away, and when she looks back, he's vanished. She lies in bed and contemplates the Navajo bracelet before bringing a soda down to the basement where John's been staying. He says he can't drink salt, but offers to show Libby his creepy basement laboratory full of lamprey eels. He thinks they're the key to helping freshwater fish adapt to new climates, and eerily waxes poetic about their parasitic nature. Libby, unaware she's in a horror movie, decides that he's a pretty cool guy. John invites Libby to help him pull some eels from the lake, and she tells him on the boat that she's applied to Cambridge without her mother's knowledge. John sees blood flowing from Libby's skirt and quickly thrusts his shirt between her legs, touching her in the process. A random water snake starts flapping around the boat for some reason, and John removes it before licking Libby's blood from his fingers and lecherously commenting that she has some red in her hair. He takes her back to shore and tells her to throw his shirt away. In the shower, Libby removes the bracelet and sees it's left a deep mark on her wrist. John knocks on the door and Libby ignores him, but he walks in anyway and starts aggressively sniffing the shower curtain. He then smells her shirt before taking it with him. Libby notices and tries to knock on Michelle's door, but finds John in there with her. She gets dressed and goes under the house, where she attempts unsuccessfully to pry open the basement window. She tries to call her best friend Marley, but the reception is thrown off. So she messages Marley online asking her to come over, but Marley says she can't until the next day. Libby hears a knock on the door and opens it to find a sandwich and a note from John apologizing for his awkwardness. In bed that night, Libby sees strange lights and looks out to see a warm glow coming from under the lake. She then sees John walking into the lake until he disappears under it completely. Libby tries to wake Michelle, but gets no response, so she goes outside to investigate. John creeps up from the woods behind her and says that he's been sleepwalking before showing Libby that his clothes are completely dry. But Libby doesn't buy the story and huffily stomps away. The next day, Michelle gets sick in the toilet and asks Libby to buy her a pregnancy test. After getting some serious side-eye from the drugstore clerk, Libby thinks she sees John walk by with a red-headed woman. She follows them outside and watches as he feels the woman up before looking behind him in Libby's direction. Libby's interrupted by the drugstore clerk, who tells her she forgot to pay him, and she watches as the couple drives away. When Libby gets home, she finds Marley on the couch but rushes past her to Michelle's room. A sweaty and habitually shirtless John is in there with her, and he apparently already knows about the potential pregnancy. Libby doesn't want to leave Michelle alone with John, but Michelle urges her to go downstairs. Before Libby goes, John makes a suggestive comment about Marley and stares Libby down with a smile. As she leaves, he tries to wink at her but can't quite pull it off. Libby tells Marley about everything that's happened and asks her to stay overnight. Marley says she can't, but she decides to march upstairs and tell Michelle about the incident on the boat. Libby tries to eavesdrop from downstairs, but she can't hear anything, so she just eats some macaroni salad and goes to bed. When she wakes up several hours later, Michelle and John are cuddled up on the couch watching home movies. Michelle tells Libby that Marley left some time ago, but that she did tell her what happened on the boat. Michelle defends John and accuses Libby of trying to sabotage their relationship. Libby sees that John has a third eyelid and tries to pull Michelle away, but Michelle slaps her. Libby angrily reveals Michelle's age and suggests she might be on the verge of menopause, which freaks John out and causes him to leave angrily. Michelle storms upstairs and tells Libby that if she goes to Cambridge, Michelle will sell the house. Later that night, Libby hears noises upstairs and goes outside to investigate, but she can't see anything from the window. When she returns inside, she hears Michelle screaming and finds her in bed, making love to John. Strange protrusions appear under his skin, and he begins growling inhumanly. Libby goes back to her room but hears footsteps passing and returns to find Michelle and John no longer in bed. The lake begins glowing again, but almost immediately stops. Libby goes outside and walks into the lake to investigate, but she can't see anything. She tries driving the car up to the lake so she can see with its headlights, but it rolls into the lake and gets stuck in the mud. Libby thinks to flip the high beams on, and she freaks out when she sees something beneath the water. Libby runs inside and tries to call Michelle, but she can hear the ringtone coming from nearby. She follows it down to the basement and slowly descends the stairs. On the way, she sees glowing alien symbols on her wrist where the Navajo bracelet used to be. When she gets down to John's lab, she finds Michelle being held captive in a water-filled tank. She goes to help her and sees that Michelle has the same symbols on the wrist where she'd been wearing John's watch. John approaches and Libby hides behind the tank where she can see his strange alien feet start to burn as he walks into a puddle of salty water. He returns in boots and becomes excited as Michelle goes into labor. When she delivers a stillborn, he storms off in disappointment. Libby watches through the window as John cradles the dead creature before regurgitating a glowing orb-like substance into its lifeless mouth. Libby locks the basement entrance and tries to call 911, but the call won't go through. A blinking red light draws her attention to a signal jammer on the table nearby. John comes to the door and calls out to Libby, mocking her when she lies that the police are on their way. Libby smashes the jamming device and dials 911, but John smashes the basement window. Libby tries to hide as the dispatcher assures her the cops are on their way, and from her hiding spot, she sees Marley's corpse, floating in a tank with lampreys feeding on her flesh. John attacks Libby and breaks her phone before picking her up by the throat and menacing her with his long alien tongue. Libby fights back by attacking him with a bucket of salt, burning his face. As he collapses, Libby helps Michelle out of her tank. She takes Michelle outside and tries to make a break for it, but Michelle collapses and cries out as John catches up with them. Everything goes black. Libby wakes up later alone and held captive in an empty basement. One by one, John clones begin descending the stairs, including the one she saw at the drugstore earlier. They tear into the basement walls with their bare hands, revealing red-headed women trapped behind the walls in watery tanks. John enters and forcibly coughs the same glowing substance from earlier into Libby's mouth. She tries to struggle, but he holds her mouth closed and forces her to swallow it. She almost passes out immediately after. Libby wakes up again, no longer tied up. As we zoom out, we see that she's in a clear tank that soon begins filling with water as Libby screams and pounds on the glass to escape. The tank appears suspended in a dark space surrounded by cocooned women matching the ones trapped in the basement walls. Libby's tank fills up completely and she begins struggling to hold her breath. When she can no longer hold it, she finally exhales and realizes that she can now breathe underwater. She briefly smiles and everything cuts to black. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.